Sir, you need to leave that seat. Now. The words cut through the quiet like a blade. Every head in first class turned at once, but no one spoke. Not when the flight attendant stood over Marcus Reed, her voice sharp, her posture certain. Not when a well-dressed couple behind her watched with thin smiles, as if the outcome had already been decided. Marcus didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just sat there in seat 3A, hands resting calmly on the armrests, eyes steady, like a man who had already seen this moment before and chosen not to run from it. "I'm in my assigned seat," he said quietly. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. Someone lowered their gaze. Someone else lifted a phone, but still, no one stepped in. Because it was easier to stay silent, easier to believe what the uniform believed. As the tension tightened, a small detail slipped unnoticed. Marcus's worn silver watch catching the cabin light, its edge engraved with a logo no one bothered to recognize. Not yet. But in less than 30 minutes, that same cabin, the same people, would learn exactly who they had tried to remove. And by then, it wouldn't just be one seat on the line. It would be everything. The cabin lights glowed a clean, polished white, reflecting softly off brushed metal and cream leather seats. It was the kind of quiet that only existed in first class, a curated silence, where even the hum of the engines seemed distant, like something happening to other people. Marcus Reed sat in seat 3A by the window. Outside, the Chicago sky stretched gray and heavy, the kind that promised delay before it delivered it. Inside, everything was controlled, measured, predictable, until it wasn't. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step out of this seat." The voice came from the aisle, clear, firm, practiced, heads turned without seeming to turn. Marcus didn't move. The woman standing over him wore a crisp navy uniform, her scarf folded with exact precision at her throat. Her name tag caught the overhead light. Claire Whitman. Her posture was straight, her expression carefully neutral, but there was something under it, something already decided. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, looking up at her. His voice was calm, not defensive, not confused, just steady. "This seat," she said, a little louder now, just enough for the row behind to hear, "is reserved for priority passengers." A ripple moved through the cabin. Not sound, not quite movement, just a tension tightening. Marcus glanced down at his boarding pass resting on his lap. He lifted it between two fingers and held it out. "Seat 3A, he said. "That's what it says." Claire didn't take it right away. Behind her, a man cleared his throat, expensively dressed, late 50s, silver hair, cut with intention. A gold watch flashed as he adjusted his cuff, like time itself belonged to him. "We always sit here," the man said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Every flight, same seats." His wife stood just behind him, one hand gripping the handle of a pale leather handbag. Her smile was thin, tight at the edges, as if she had already decided how this would end. Claire finally took the boarding pass, glanced at it, then back at Marcus. "Yes," she said slowly, "I see that. But there must have been a system error." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "A system error," he repeated. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't sarcasm. Just a fact, placed carefully between them. The man behind Claire exhaled sharply, impatience slipping through. "Look," he said, stepping closer into the aisle, crowding the space. "We don't have time for this. Just move him so we can get settled." Move him. Not ask. Not check. Just move. A few rows back, someone shifted in their seat. Another passenger lowered their reading glasses, watching over the top of the frame. A young man in row 4 slowly raised his phone. Not obviously, not yet, but enough. Marcus felt all of it. The eyes, the weight, the expectation. He had felt it before. In hotel lobbies where the concierge spoke to the person behind him first. In meetings where his ideas were repeated 5 minutes later by someone else, and suddenly mattered. In rooms where silence had edges. He placed his boarding pass gently on the armrest. "I'm in the correct seat," he said. Claire's smile tightened, just a fraction. "Sir, I understand this might be confusing." "It's not confusing." He didn't raise his voice, didn't interrupt her aggressively. He just finished the sentence for her, and that made it land harder. The man behind her laughed under his breath. "You hear that?" he said to his wife. "Not confusing." She let out a soft, amused breath, eyes still fixed on Marcus, like he was something that needed to be removed, not understood. Claire straightened. "Mr. She glanced at the boarding pass again. "Reed, I need you to cooperate. We have loyal passengers who rely on consistent seating arrangements." Marcus looked past her for a moment, at the couple standing there. The man's jaw was set, already annoyed by the delay. The woman's fingers tightened around her handbag strap, as if the mere act of waiting was beneath her. Then Marcus looked back at Claire. "Consistency," he said quietly, "is not the same as ownership." The words settled into the air like dust after something breaks. A man across the aisle stopped scrolling his phone. The young passenger in row 4 lifted his camera a little higher. Claire felt it, the shift. Not in control yet. Not lost either. Just different. "Sir," she said, voice cooler now, "refusing a crew instruction can become a serious issue." There it was. The line. Not about seats anymore. About authority. Marcus rested both hands on the armrests, fingers relaxed. "I'm not refusing anything," he said. "I'm sitting in the seat I paid for." Behind Claire, the man stepped closer, his voice dropping lower, rougher. "You're holding up the entire cabin over one seat," he said. "Is that really worth it?" Marcus turned his head slightly toward him. "For you," he said, "it's one seat." A pause. The kind that makes people uncomfortable because they don't know what it means yet. Then he looked forward again. Claire inhaled slowly, then exhaled through her nose, recalibrating. "Let me be clear," she said. "I need you to gather your belongings and move to another seat." Marcus didn't reach for his bag, didn't shift in his chair, didn't even blink right away. The silence stretched, long enough that people started noticing it, long enough that it became something. A woman in row 2 adjusted her scarf, eyes flicking between Marcus and Claire. A man behind her coughed softly, as if trying to break the tension without getting involved. No one spoke. No one intervened. The cabin held its breath. Marcus finally leaned forward just enough to pick up his boarding pass again. He looked at it, then at Claire. Then, very carefully, he set it back down. "I'm not moving," he said. No anger, no defiance in tone, just certainty. And something about that, something about how calm he was, made the air feel heavier than if he had shouted. Claire blinked once. Behind her, the man's patience snapped. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You're seriously going to let this go on?" Claire's jaw tightened. "No," she said. Then she looked back at Marcus, and for the first time there was no trace of politeness left in her voice. "Sir, I'm going to call my supervisor." Marcus nodded once. "Please do." The words didn't challenge her. They invited something bigger. And that was the moment a few people in the cabin felt it. Felt that this wasn't going to end the way they expected. The young man in row 4 steadied his phone. The woman in row 2 stopped pretending not to watch. And Marcus Reed sat perfectly still in seat 3A, as if he had nowhere else to be. because he didn't, and for reasons no one in that cabin yet understood. Neither did the airline. A few hours earlier, long before the polished lights of first class and the quiet tension of row 3, Marcus Reed stood in a place where nobody looked twice at him. The air smelled like onions, warm bread, and old metal. The kind of smell that stayed in your clothes long after you left. It drifted through the narrow hallway of a small community kitchen on the west side of Detroit, where chipped tile floors met dented stainless steel counters, and the hum of an overworked refrigerator never quite stopped. Marcus rolled up the sleeves of his navy shirt, revealing forearms marked not by scars, but by years of quiet labor. He stood beside an aging industrial stove, its pilot light flickering weakly, struggling to stay alive. "You sure you know what you're doing with that thing?" A woman's voice called from behind him, Mrs. Wong. Carter stood near the doorway, wiping her hands on a faded dish towel. She was in her late 70s, small-framed but steady, her gray hair tucked beneath a knitted cap. She had run this kitchen for 23 years, feeding anyone who showed up without asking questions. Marcus glanced back at her with a faint smile. "I don't," he said, "but I know someone who did." He crouched down, adjusting a small valve near the base of the stove. The metal groaned in protest, then clicked softly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the flame steadied. It wasn't dramatic. No burst of light. No applause. Just a quiet, reliable burn. Mrs. Carter stepped closer, her eyes narrowing slightly, then softening. "Well, I'll be," she said. "Maintenance said that thing was done for." Marcus stood, brushing his hands together. "Sometimes things just need a second look," he replied. She studied him for a moment longer, as if trying to place something she couldn't quite name. "You always talk like that?" she asked. Marcus shrugged lightly. "Only when I'm trying not to talk too much." A faint laugh escaped her, low and genuine. From the far side of the room, a young boy, no older than 9, sat at a small table, swinging his legs as he watched. "Mr. Marcus fixed it again," the boy said, grinning. Marcus turned toward him. "Not fixed," he corrected gently. "Just helped it keep going." The boy nodded like that made perfect sense. It usually did when Marcus said it. A volunteer passed by carrying a tray of bread rolls, the scent filling the room. Outside the narrow windows, the late morning sun cut through clouds in uneven patches, lighting up sections of cracked pavement and faded brick buildings. This place wasn't polished. It wasn't quiet. It was real. And here, Marcus belonged without question. Mrs. Carter moved toward the front counter, then paused. "You didn't have to come in today," she said. "You said you had somewhere to be." Marcus checked his watch, an old silver Timex with a worn leather strap, its face scratched but clean. "I do," he said. She crossed her arms. "And you still showed up." Marcus leaned back against the counter, looking around the kitchen, at the volunteers, the worn tables, the boy still watching him like he was someone worth noticing. "I had time," he said simply. Mrs. Carter studied him again, then nodded once as if that answer was enough. It usually was. A few minutes later, as the lunch line began to form outside, Marcus slipped quietly into the small office near the back. The room was barely larger than a closet, filled with old filing cabinets and a desk that had seen better decades. He pulled a folded envelope from his pocket and set it on the desk. No name, no note, just an amount written on the inside that would cover the kitchen's rent for the next 3 months. He hesitated for a second, then closed the envelope and left it there, sliding it beneath a stack of paperwork. When he stepped back into the main room, Mrs. Carter was already busy greeting the first wave of people coming in. He didn't say goodbye. He rarely did. Instead, he moved toward the door, nodding once to the boy at the table. "See you next week?" the boy asked. Marcus paused, hand on the door. Yeah, he said. Next week. Outside, the air was colder, sharper, the kind that reminded you winter hadn't fully let go yet. Cars passed slowly along the street. A bus hissed as it pulled up to the curb down the block, its brakes releasing a tired sigh. Marcus stepped onto the sidewalk, pulling his jacket on as he walked. His phone buzzed once. He glanced down at the screen. A message waited there. No emojis. No small talk. Just 5 words. Board is waiting. We need you. Marcus read it once. Then again. His expression didn't change. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and kept walking. A few steps later, he stopped beside a woman struggling with a grocery bag that had split at the bottom, oranges rolling across the sidewalk. He crouched down without hesitation, gathering them one by one. Thank you, the woman said, embarrassed. It happens, Marcus replied, handing her the last one. She smiled, relief softening her face. You headed somewhere important? She asked, noticing the way he carried himself, the quiet purpose in his steps. Marcus stood, adjusting his jacket. Just work, he said. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. A car horn sounded in the distance. The bus pulled away. The city kept moving. Marcus turned toward the corner and kept walking, his pace steady, his path clear. Behind him, the small kitchen continued its work, feeding people, warming hands, holding space for those who needed it. And ahead of him, beyond the airport, beyond the quiet tension waiting in seat 3A, something else was already in motion. Something bigger than a seat. Something that had nothing to do with where he was sitting, and everything to do with who he was. Back in that first-class cabin, they saw a man who didn't fit. But out here, in the places that didn't shine, Marcus Reed was exactly where he was supposed to be. And the only question left was, what would happen when those two worlds finally collided? The answer began quietly, back in seat 3A. The cabin hadn't moved. Time had. A few seconds earlier, it had been a disagreement, a misunderstanding maybe, something that could still be smoothed over with the right tone, the right smile, the right apology. Now, it was something else. Claire Whitman returned from the front galley with a man walking beside her. He wore a dark vest over a pressed white shirt, his posture rigid, his expression already set before he reached row 3. Trevor Mason, cabin supervisor. He didn't look at Marcus first. He looked at the situation, at the couple standing in the aisle, at Claire's tight shoulders, at the passengers pretending not to stare, at the young man in row 4 holding his phone just low enough to claim he wasn't recording, but high enough that everyone knew he was. Trevor took all of it in within a single breath. Then he turned to Marcus. Sir, he said, voice even, controlled. I'm Trevor Mason. I understand there's an issue with your seat. Marcus looked up at him, his posture unchanged, his hands still resting lightly on the armrests. There's no issue with my ticket, Marcus replied. Trevor nodded slowly, as if that answer was expected, but not accepted. That's not what I asked, he said. The tone shifted again, not louder, just narrower, like a door closing halfway. Behind Trevor, the man in the charcoal suit let out a quiet sigh, relieved that someone had finally stepped in who looked like he could restore order. Finally, he muttered. Someone who can fix this. Trevor didn't acknowledge him directly, but the alignment was clear. It was already leaning in one direction. Marcus saw it. He had seen it before. Trevor clasped his hands loosely in front of him. My crew has requested that you relocate to another seat so we can accommodate a seating concern, he said. We need your cooperation so we can get this flight moving. Marcus tilted his head slightly. A seating concern, he repeated. It sounded harmless, neutral, like paperwork. He glanced briefly at the empty seat beside him, then at the couple still standing in the aisle. Then he looked back at Trevor. They have assigned seats, Marcus said. Trevor's lips pressed together for a moment. This is about flexibility, he replied. Sometimes we have to make adjustments for the overall experience of our passengers. Marcus nodded once, slowly. Which passengers? He asked. The question hung there, not aggressive, not rhetorical, just precise. Trevor hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, then recovered. All passengers, sir. Marcus leaned back slightly in his seat, his eyes steady. Then the adjustment would be for them to sit in their assigned seats, he said. The man behind Trevor shifted sharply, his patience cracking. Are you serious right now? He said. We've been flying this airline for 20 years. 20 years. And you're going to let this guy argue over a seat? Trevor raised a hand slightly, signaling for calm, but the gesture was more symbolic than effective. Marcus turned his head just enough to meet the man's eyes. I'm not arguing, he said. I'm staying where my ticket says I belong. The word hung in the air. Belong. It landed differently for everyone in that cabin. The woman in row 2 lowered her gaze, fingers tightening around the edge of her scarf. The young man with the phone steadied his grip. Claire shifted her weight, discomfort beginning to show beneath her composure. Trevor exhaled slowly. Sir, he said, I need to be very clear. If a crew member gives you an instruction and you refuse, it can escalate into a compliance issue. There it was. Another step. Another layer. Marcus didn't react. Didn't lean forward. Didn't raise his voice. He just looked at Trevor. My behavior hasn't changed, he said. Trevor's jaw tightened. This isn't about behavior, he replied. It is, Marcus said quietly. You're just calling it something else. The cabin fell into a deeper silence. Even the soft clink of glass from the galley seemed to fade. A man across the aisle shifted uncomfortably in his seat. A woman behind him pretended to scroll through her phone, though her eyes hadn't moved in seconds. No one spoke. Not to defend Marcus. Not to support Trevor. Just silence. The kind that lets things happen. Trevor stepped a little closer into the aisle, reducing the space between himself and Marcus. Sir, he said, voice firmer now, I need you to gather your belongings and move to the next available seat. Marcus didn't reach for his bag, didn't even glance at the overhead bin. Instead, he reached down and picked up his boarding pass again. He held it up between them. Seat 3A, he said. Confirmed. Trevor didn't take it. I've seen your ticket, he replied. Then you've seen there's no mistake, Marcus said. The words were calm, too calm. That was what made them difficult. The man behind Trevor scoffed. This is unbelievable, he said. You're really going to let him do this? Trevor didn't turn, didn't respond. But the pressure was there now, building from both sides. Marcus felt it. The weight of expectation, the unspoken rule. Give in, make it easier, don't make a scene. He had followed that rule once, years ago. A different flight, a different version of himself. Younger, less certain. He had stood up then, moved without asking questions, told himself it wasn't worth it, that there were bigger things ahead. He had been right. But something had stayed behind in that moment. Something he never got back. Marcus looked at Trevor. I'm not moving, he said again. Not louder, not sharper. Just final. Trevor's expression hardened. Then I'm going to have to escalate this, he said. Marcus gave a small nod. I understand. The simplicity of the response caught Trevor off guard. He had expected resistance, emotion, something he could label. This was harder. A pause stretched between them. Then Marcus spoke again, his voice steady. If you're going to move me, he said, I need it documented. Trevor blinked. Documented? He repeated. Yes, Marcus said. Your name, your employee number, the reason for moving me, and confirmation that it's not related to safety. Claire's eyes flicked to Trevor. The man in the aisle shifted, confused now. What is he talking about? He said. Marcus didn't look at him. He was still looking at Trevor. That's not escalation, Marcus continued. That's accountability. The word settled into the cabin like a weight. Accountability. It didn't belong in this space. Not here. Not like this. Trevor felt it. So did Claire. So did the passengers who had chosen silence. For the first time, uncertainty crept into the edges of the moment. Small, barely visible. But there. Trevor glanced briefly toward the front of the cabin, then back at Marcus. There's no need to make this more complicated than it is, he said. Marcus held his gaze. It already is, he replied. Another pause, longer this time. Then, from somewhere behind them, a voice. Quiet, hesitant. He hasn't done anything wrong. It came from the woman in row 2, soft, almost lost in the air. But it landed. Claire turned her head sharply. Ma'am, she said, please let us handle this. The woman swallowed, her hand trembling slightly in her lap. I'm just saying, she murmured, not looking up. He showed his ticket. Silence again. But it was different now. Not empty. Not passive. Cracked. Trevor felt it shift beneath his feet. The script wasn't holding, and for the first time he wasn't entirely sure how it would end. He looked back at Marcus. Really looked this time. Not at the suit. Not at the seat. At the man. Still calm. Still seated. Still exactly where he had been from the beginning. And something about that, something about how little had changed, made the situation feel suddenly much larger than a single seat on a single flight. Trevor straightened. I'm going to contact operations, he said. Marcus nodded once. Please do. The words echoed in the quiet cabin. Not a challenge. Not a threat. An invitation. And as Trevor turned and walked toward the front, past the watching passengers, past the silent aisle, past the thin line where authority met doubt, one question settled into the space he left behind. If the system was right, why did it suddenly feel like it was starting to break? The answer didn't come all at once. It came in small shifts, a glance held too long, a voice that tightened instead of softened, a silence that no longer felt passive, but strained. Trevor Mason stopped near the front of the cabin, one hand pressed lightly against the bulkhead as he spoke into a low-mounted intercom. His voice dropped to a controlled murmur, words clipped and efficient. From row 3, Marcus couldn't hear what was being said, but he didn't need to. He had heard versions of this conversation before. Different places, different uniforms, same tone. Clarify, contain, resolve. Preferably without admitting anything had gone wrong. Back in the aisle, Claire Whitman shifted her weight from one foot to the other. Her composure was still intact, but it no longer felt effortless. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the passengers, then back to Marcus. She was waiting, for Trevor to return, for authority to settle things, for the moment to snap back into something familiar. Behind her, Richard Langford exhaled loudly, checking his watch again as if time itself were being wasted on something beneath him. "This is getting ridiculous," he said. "We're going to miss our departure window because of this." His wife nodded, her voice lower but sharper. "It's not complicated," Patricia added. "We have our seats. We've always had them." Always. The word hung there. Marcus turned slightly toward her. "Assigned seats don't change based on habit," he said. Patricia smiled again, but this time the warmth was gone entirely. "Some things don't need to be written down to be understood," she replied. Marcus held her gaze. "Some things do," he said quietly. A pause. Then Patricia looked away first. Across the aisle, a man in a gray suit shifted in his seat, crossing his legs as if trying to distance himself from the tension. A woman beside him folded her hands tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the tray table in front of her. No one spoke. No one intervened. The silence wasn't neutral anymore. It was choosing. Claire stepped forward again, her voice returning, more controlled now but edged. "Mr. Reed," she said, "we're trying to resolve this efficiently. If you'd just move temporarily, we can sort out the details afterward." Temporarily. Marcus almost smiled. That word, too, had a history. Temporary solutions that became permanent decisions. Small concessions that rewrote entire narratives. He leaned back slightly in his seat, folding his hands loosely. "If the details matter," he said, "they matter now." Claire's jaw tightened. "This is about cooperation," she replied. "No," Marcus said. "It's about consistency." He let the word settle, then added, "You said that earlier." Claire blinked once. Behind her, Richard let out a short, humorless laugh. "You're twisting words now," he said. "This isn't a courtroom." Marcus didn't look at him. "Then it shouldn't feel like one," he said. That landed harder than anything louder could have. A few rows back, the young man filming shifted slightly, angling his phone to capture the exchange more clearly. The glow of the screen reflected faintly in the polished surfaces around him. Claire noticed. Her expression flickered. For a brief second, something real crossed her face. Not authority, not confidence, uncertainty. Trevor returned then, his steps measured but quicker than before. He didn't speak immediately. He took his place beside Claire, his eyes moving from Marcus to the Langfords, then to the passengers around them. He was recalculating. "This is what we're going to do," Trevor said finally. The tone had changed again, more decisive, less patient. He looked directly at Marcus. "We're going to relocate you to another first-class seat. You'll still be in the same cabin, same service level. This way, everyone can move forward." "Everyone." Marcus nodded once. "That's not a solution," he said. Trevor's expression hardened. "It is," he replied. "It's a compromise." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "A compromise requires both sides to give something up," he said. "What are they giving up?" Trevor didn't answer right away, because there wasn't one. The silence that followed was sharp enough to feel. Richard stepped forward, his voice rising just enough to carry. "We're not giving anything up," he said. "We're asking for what's ours." Marcus turned his head toward him slowly. "What's assigned to you," he said, "is yours." Richard's face flushed. "That's not how this works," he snapped. Marcus held his gaze. "It is," he said. The cabin tightened again. Claire looked between them, her control slipping just a fraction more. "Mr. Reed," she said, more firmly now, "you're making this more difficult than it needs to be." Marcus didn't respond right away. He let the words sit there. Then he reached down, picked up his boarding pass again, and placed it carefully on the armrest. Next to it, almost without thinking, his sleeve shifted slightly. The edge of his watch caught the light. Silver. Worn. Simple. But engraved along the rim, barely visible unless you were looking closely, was a small, precise logo. Trevor's eyes flicked to it. Just for a second. Then back to Marcus. Something in his expression shifted. Not recognition. Not yet. But awareness. A detail that didn't fit the rest of the picture. Marcus noticed. Of course he did. He always noticed when people started looking differently. He leaned back again, hands resting lightly on the armrests. "If you're going to move me," he said, voice calm, "then say why." Trevor inhaled slowly. "You've been given a reason," he said. "No," Marcus replied. "I've been given a preference." The word landed clean. Claire's shoulders tightened. Richard scoffed again. "This is unbelievable," he said. "We're arguing semantics now?" Marcus turned slightly toward him. "No," he said. "We're defining them." Another pause. Longer this time. Then Trevor spoke, his voice lower, more controlled than before. "Mr. Reed, I'm advising you to comply so we can avoid further escalation." Marcus nodded once. "I hear you," he said. But he didn't move, didn't reach for his bag, didn't even shift in his seat. The stillness had become something else now. Not passive, not defensive, deliberate. And that was what made it impossible to ignore. A woman in row 2 finally lifted her head again, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's not wrong." Claire turned sharply. "Ma'am." But the woman didn't continue. She didn't need to. The crack had already formed. Trevor felt it. Claire felt it. Even Richard felt it, though he refused to acknowledge it. The narrative was slipping, and no one quite knew how to grab it back. Trevor straightened, his decision made, not from clarity, but from pressure. "Then we'll proceed differently," he said. Marcus watched him, calm, waiting. Trevor reached for the tablet at his side, his fingers tightening around it. "We're going to escalate this to operations," he said. "They'll determine the next step." Marcus nodded again. "That's a good idea," he said. Trevor paused. Something about the way he said it, not resistant, not worried, just certain, made the words feel different, like they didn't mean what Trevor thought they meant. Claire noticed it too. Her eyes flicked once more to Marcus, then to the watch, then back again. And for the first time since this started, a question formed in her mind that hadn't been there before. What if this man wasn't the problem, but the consequence? Trevor turned and moved toward the front again, this time faster, his steps less measured, more urgent. Behind him, the cabin remained frozen in place. Passengers watched. Phones stayed raised. Silence held. And Marcus Reed sat exactly where he had been from the beginning, in seat 3A, as the system that was supposed to remove him began, slowly, to turn against itself. The shift wasn't loud. It didn't come with alarms or raised voices or sudden movement. It came in the way people started watching differently, the way silence stopped protecting the situation and started exposing it. Marcus could feel it. Not as tension, but as space. Space where assumptions had been. Space where certainty used to sit. Claire Whitman stood in that space now, her posture still upright, her uniform still perfect, but something beneath it had changed. Her hands were clasped just a little tighter around the tablet she carried. Her breathing, though controlled, no longer matched the rhythm of someone entirely in control. She glanced toward the front of the cabin, where Trevor had disappeared behind the curtain, his voice now low and urgent over the intercom. Then she looked back at Marcus. Really looked this time. Not scanning, not judging, looking. He hadn't moved, not once. His bag remained in the overhead bin. His jacket was still folded neatly beside him. His boarding pass rested exactly where he had placed it, aligned with the edge of the armrest like it belonged there. Like he belonged there. Claire swallowed. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice returning, but softer now, not less firm, just less certain. "We're trying to resolve this in a way that avoids further disruption." Marcus nodded once. "I understand," he said, but he didn't reach for his belongings, didn't shift, didn't comply. Claire hesitated. "You're asking us to document this," she said, choosing her words carefully now. Marcus leaned forward slightly, just enough to rest his forearms on his knees. "I'm asking you to be clear," he said. The distinction mattered. It always had. Claire's eyes flicked again to his watch, the one Trevor had noticed, the worn leather strap, the clean, simple face, and that small, precise engraving along the edge. She couldn't read it from where she stood. But she had seen logos like that before. Not often. Not in this setting. Not on someone being asked to move. Her fingers tightened slightly around the tablet. "Documentation is usually reserved for formal incidents," she said. Marcus held her gaze. "Then this is one," he replied. The words didn't echo. They settled. Heavy. Definitive. Behind her, Richard Langford shifted again, irritation now giving way to something sharper. "This has gone far enough," he said. "You're turning a simple situation into something it's not." Marcus didn't look at him. He didn't need to. "It became something else," Marcus said quietly, "when you decided I didn't belong here." Richard's jaw tightened. "I didn't say that," he snapped. Marcus turned his head just slightly. "You didn't have to," he said. The cabin went still again. Not quiet. Still, as if movement itself might interrupt something fragile and irreversible. Patricia crossed her arms, her composure beginning to fracture at the edges. "This is absurd," she said, her voice thinner now. "You're making everyone uncomfortable." Marcus looked at her, not harshly, not with anger, just steadily. "I didn't start that," he said. A few rows back, someone shifted in their seat. A man near the aisle cleared his throat, then looked away quickly when Claire's eyes flicked in his direction. No one wanted to be seen choosing a side, but everyone knew a side existed. Claire drew in a slow breath. "Mr. Reed," she said, "if we escalate this further, it could delay the entire flight." Marcus nodded. "Yes," he said. Nothing more. No apology. No hesitation. Just acknowledgement. That unsettled her more than resistance would have. "You're willing to do that?" she asked. Marcus leaned back again, his hands returning to the armrests. "I'm willing to stay where my ticket says I belong," he said. The difference was clear. Claire felt it. So did everyone else. From the front of the cabin, the curtain shifted slightly as Trevor stepped back into view. His pace was quicker now, his expression tighter, the controlled confidence he had walked away with no longer quite intact. He approached with purpose, but not certainty. Claire turned toward him immediately. "Well?" she asked quietly. Trevor didn't answer right away. He looked at Marcus, then at the boarding pass, then again at the watch, that small detail that didn't fit. His voice, when it came, was lower than before. Operations wants more information, he said. Claire blinked. More information? She repeated. Trevor nodded. They want a full report before making a decision. That wasn't how this usually worked. Claire knew it. So did Trevor. Normally, these situations were handled on the spot. Quickly, quietly, without escalation, without documentation, without questions. But now, there were questions. Marcus noticed the shift. Of course he did. He had been waiting for it. Trevor stepped closer. Mr. Reed, he said, we're going to need you to provide your account of the situation. Marcus met his eyes. I already have, he said. Trevor's jaw tightened. In writing, he clarified. Marcus nodded once. That's a good start, he said. The words landed differently this time. Not defiant. Not resistant. Measured. Like someone who understood exactly where this was going. Claire felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. Concern. Not for the passenger. For the situation. For herself. For what this might become. She glanced again at the passengers. The phones. The silence that had turned from passive to attentive. This wasn't contained anymore. Trevor seemed to realize it at the same time. We're going to step into the galley, he said to Claire. I need to speak with operations again. Claire nodded quickly. They turned together, moving toward the front, their conversation dropping into hushed urgency as they disappeared behind the curtain. For a moment, the cabin was left without authority. Just passengers. And Marcus. The man in row 4 lowered his phone slightly, exhaling. Man, he whispered under his breath, shaking his head. The woman in row 2 looked toward Marcus, her eyes filled with something softer now. Respect. Maybe even regret. She didn't speak. Not yet. Marcus sat quietly, his gaze drifting toward the window. Outside, the sky hadn't changed. Still gray, still heavy, still waiting. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The screen lit up. The message was still there. Board is waiting. We need you. He read it again. Then, without hesitation, he tapped the screen and placed the phone to his ear. The call connected almost instantly. Yeah, Marcus said, his voice calm, low. A pause. Then, delay everything. He didn't raise his voice, didn't explain, didn't elaborate. He ended the call before the person on the other end could respond, and set the phone back down. The man in row 4 froze, his phone halfway between recording and lowering. The woman in row 2 blinked. Claire hadn't heard it. Trevor hadn't heard it. But someone had. And something, somewhere beyond this cabin, had just changed direction. Marcus leaned back again in seat 3A, still calm, still composed, still exactly where he had been from the beginning. But now, for the first time, the imbalance wasn't in the room anymore. It had moved. Outward. And whatever came back wasn't going to ask him to move. At first, nothing happened. At least nothing anyone in the cabin could point to. No alarms, no announcements, no sudden rush of authority. Just the same soft hum of the aircraft. The same muted glow of overhead lights. The same carefully arranged stillness that had defined first class from the moment boarding began. But underneath it, something had shifted. Trevor and Claire remained behind the curtain longer than before. Their voices, low and urgent, bled faintly through the fabric, no longer controlled, no longer measured for an audience. This wasn't performance anymore. It was reaction. In row 3, Marcus didn't look up. He didn't watch the curtain, didn't check his phone again. He simply sat, his posture unchanged, his presence steady. as if time itself had slowed around him. Across the aisle, the man in the gray suit leaned slightly toward the woman beside him. "Did he just—" he began, then stopped. The woman shook her head faintly. "I don't know," she whispered. But they both knew something had happened. They just didn't understand what. The young man in row 4 raised his phone again, more openly this time. There was no pretense now. The moment had grown too large to ignore, too sharp to hide behind courtesy. A few seats back, someone shifted their carry-on bag, though there was nowhere to go. People were waiting. For resolution. For authority to return. For the moment to shrink back into something manageable. But it didn't. Instead, the curtain moved. Trevor stepped out first. And something was wrong. Not obvious, not dramatic, but wrong. His shoulders were tighter, his jaw more rigid. The kind of rigidity that comes not from control, but from pressure. Claire followed behind him, her face pale beneath the cabin lights, her lips pressed thin. They didn't look at the Langfords right away. They looked at Marcus. That alone was enough to change the air. Trevor walked back down the aisle, slower this time. Measured. Careful. As if every step now required thought. He stopped beside seat 3A. "Mr. Reed," he said, his voice quieter than before. Marcus looked up. "Yes?" Trevor hesitated. Just for a second. Then he glanced at Claire. Claire shook her head almost imperceptibly, like she didn't have the answer he was hoping for. Trevor turned back. "Operations is reviewing the situation," he said. The words sounded formal, routine, but they weren't. Marcus nodded once. "I expected that," he said. Trevor's eyes flickered. "You expected it?" he repeated. Marcus held his gaze. "When something doesn't make sense," he said, "someone eventually asks the right question." Trevor didn't respond, because the question had already been asked. And the answer wasn't simple. Behind him, Richard Langford stepped forward again, irritation now edged with something sharper. "What's taking so long?" he demanded. "This should have been handled already." Trevor turned toward him, but this time, he didn't immediately agree. "They're verifying some details," he said. "Verifying what?" Richard snapped. "You saw the ticket." Trevor's jaw tightened. "Yes," he said. "I did." "Then what's the problem?" Patricia added, her voice thin with impatience. "We've never had to go through this before." That word again. Never. Marcus noticed. So did Trevor. And for the first time, Trevor didn't respond with reassurance. Instead, he looked back at Marcus, at the man who hadn't moved, at the man who hadn't raised his voice, at the man who had made a single phone call, and then waited. Trevor's eyes dropped briefly to Marcus's wrist, to the watch, the logo. He leaned slightly closer. "Can I ask you something?" he said, his voice lower now, almost private. Marcus nodded. "You already did." Trevor hesitated, then more directly. "That watch," he said. "Where did you get it?" Claire looked at him, surprised. The question didn't belong here. Not in this moment. Not in this situation. Marcus glanced down at his wrist, then back up. "It was a gift," he said. "From who?" Trevor asked. Another pause. Not long. Just enough. "Someone who believed in what I was building," Marcus replied. The words were simple, but they didn't sound simple. Trevor felt it. Claire felt it. Even the passengers nearby leaned slightly closer, though they wouldn't have admitted it. "What are you building?" Claire asked quietly, before she could stop herself. Trevor glanced at her, surprised she had spoken. Marcus didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and picked up his phone. The screen lit up. New messages, more than before. Short lines, urgent tone. He didn't show them. He didn't need to. He looked at Claire, then at Trevor. "You're about to find out," he said. The words didn't threaten. They informed. Trevor straightened. Something inside him shifted. Not understanding. Not yet. But awareness. This was no longer about a seat. Not even about a passenger. This was about something larger. Something connected. Something already moving beyond this cabin. As if to confirm it. A voice crackled faintly from the front. "Trevor." It was the gate agent, standing just outside the aircraft door, her headset pressed tight against her ear. She looked pale, tense. "Operations needs you up here. Now." Trevor didn't move immediately. "What is it?" he asked. She hesitated. Then, "They're asking about him." The words landed hard. Trevor turned slowly, back to Marcus. "About him?" he repeated. The gate agent nodded. "They want confirmation," she said. "Name, seat, everything." Claire's breath caught. Richard frowned, confused. "Confirmation of what?" he demanded. But no one answered him because the question had already begun to answer itself. Trevor looked at Marcus. Really looked this time. Not as a problem. Not as a passenger. But as a variable he had not accounted for. Marcus met his gaze. Calm, unmoving, certain, and for the first time since this began. Trevor Mason felt something he hadn't felt when he first approached row 3. Not authority, not control. Something else. Something colder. What if they weren't trying to remove the wrong man? What if they had already crossed the wrong one? The cabin held its breath. The phones kept recording. The silence deepened. And somewhere beyond the aircraft, systems were shifting. Questions were being asked. Names were being checked. And the man in seat 3A was no longer just part of the situation. He was becoming the center of it. Trevor didn't speak again. Not to Marcus. Not to Claire. Not even to the Langfords, who now stood just slightly off balance in the aisle, their confidence no longer quite as solid as it had been 10 minutes ago. Instead, Trevor turned, fast this time, and walked straight toward the front of the aircraft. The gate agent was already waiting for him at the open door, her headset pressed tightly against her ear, her posture stiff with something that hadn't been there before. Urgency. The kind that didn't come from passengers, the kind that came from somewhere higher up. "Trevor," she said as soon as he reached her, "they're asking for you directly." "Who is they?" he asked, though he already had a feeling. She lowered her voice. "Operations. And someone from corporate just joined the line." Trevor felt his stomach tighten. Corporate didn't join gate calls. Not for seating issues. Not for first-class complaints. Not for anything that could normally be handled with a voucher and a quiet apology. "Put them through," he said. She nodded, tapping her headset. A second later, a new voice came through, clear, controlled, and unfamiliar. "Is this Supervisor Mason?" Trevor straightened instinctively. "Yes, this is Trevor Mason." A pause. Then, "Confirm the name of the passenger in seat 3A. Trevor glanced back over his shoulder. Marcus was still there. Still seated. Still calm. Still exactly where he had been from the beginning. "Marcus Reed," Trevor said. Another pause. Longer this time. Not silence. Processing. "Spell that," the voice said. Trevor did. Letter by letter. He could hear faint background noise on the other end now. Voices, keyboards, movement. A system waking up. "Stay where you are," the voice said finally. "Do not proceed with removal. We're verifying something." The line clicked. Gone. Trevor lowered his hand slowly. The gate agent looked at him. "What does that mean?" she asked. Trevor didn't answer right away, because he didn't know, not fully, but he knew enough. This had gone beyond him, beyond Claire, beyond the Langfords. And whatever was happening, it wasn't going to be contained inside this cabin. Back in row 3, the silence had deepened, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was charged. The kind of silence that exists right before something changes. Claire stood alone in the aisle now, her hands still clasped around her tablet, but her confidence slipping, piece by piece. She could feel it, in the way passengers were no longer avoiding eye contact, in the way the man with the phone wasn't even pretending anymore, in the way Marcus hadn't moved, hadn't needed to. She turned toward him again. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice lower now, stripped of authority. Marcus looked up at her. "I made a call," he said. "That's all?" "That's enough." The simplicity of the answer unsettled her more than anything else had. Behind her, Richard Langford let out a sharp breath. "This is getting out of hand," he said. "We're talking about a seat, not a federal case." Marcus turned slightly toward him. "You're right," he said. Richard blinked, surprised. "I am?" "Yes," Marcus replied. "It's not about the seat." A pause. Then, "It never was." The words settled into the cabin like a slow-moving storm. Patricia shifted beside her husband, her grip tightening on her handbag again. "What is that supposed to mean?" she asked. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to, because at that moment, Trevor returned, but not the same way he had left. His steps were faster now, not aggressive, not controlled, urgent. He walked straight past Claire, straight into the aisle, stopping just short of Marcus's row. His eyes locked onto Marcus, and for the first time, there was no authority in them, only calculation. "Mr. Reed," Trevor said. Marcus looked up. "Yes?" Trevor hesitated. That alone changed everything. "I need to ask you something," he said. Marcus nodded once. "Go ahead." Trevor glanced briefly at Claire, then back at Marcus. "Did you just make a call?" he asked. Marcus held his gaze. "Yes." Trevor swallowed. "To whom?" Another pause. "Not long." "Just enough." "Someone who listens," Marcus said. The answer didn't clarify anything, but it confirmed everything. Trevor felt it. Claire felt it. Even Richard felt it, though he didn't understand why. "What is going on?" Richard demanded. "Why is everyone acting like this is something bigger than it is?" No one answered him, because it was. The gate agent stepped into the cabin now, her presence breaking the invisible boundary between aircraft and terminal. "Trevor," she said quietly, but urgently. "They're holding other flights." The words landed like a shockwave. Trevor turned sharply. "What?" "They just flagged multiple departures," she said. "Something about system coordination." Claire stared at her. "That doesn't make sense," she said. "Why would this affect—" She stopped, because suddenly, it did make sense. Or at least, it started to. Trevor looked back at Marcus. Really looked. Not at his clothes. Not at his seat. At the man. The stillness. The certainty. The lack of reaction. The complete absence of fear. And then, The watch again. That small engraving. That detail that didn't belong. Trevor took a step closer. "Mr. Reed," he said, his voice lower now, almost careful. "I need to understand what's happening." Marcus met his eyes. "You're already seeing it," he said. Trevor shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "I'm seeing effects. I need the cause." Marcus leaned back in his seat, calm, unmoved. "You'll get there," he said. The words weren't dismissive. They were patient, like he had already lived this moment before, like he knew exactly how it would unfold. Behind Trevor, the cabin had gone completely still. No shifting, no whispering. Even the man with the phone had stopped adjusting his angle. Everyone was watching now, not out of curiosity, out of realization. Something had changed, and they were inside it. The gate agent pressed her headset again. "They're asking if he's still on board," she said. Trevor didn't look away from Marcus. "He is," he replied. A pause. Then the gate agent spoke again, her voice softer now. "They said, keep him there." The words echoed, not loud, but undeniable. "Keep him there." Claire's breath caught. Richard frowned, confused. "What does that even mean?" he asked. But no one answered, because the meaning was already clear. Marcus Reed wasn't the problem. He was the priority. And the man they had tried to move was now the one the system refused to let go. Marcus sat quietly in seat 3A, exactly where he had been told he didn't belong. And now, the entire airline was starting to understand that moving him was never an option. The realization didn't settle all at once. It spread, quietly, like something seeping into the structure of the moment itself. Trevor stood in the aisle, his posture no longer that of a man managing a situation, but of someone trying to understand one that had already moved beyond him. Claire hadn't spoken in several seconds. That alone was enough to shift the balance. Richard Langford looked between them, irritation now edged with something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. "What is going on?" he demanded again. "Why are we still standing here?" No one answered, because the answer wasn't in the cabin anymore. It had moved outward, beyond the aircraft, beyond the gate, beyond anything that could be handled with a policy or a polite explanation. The gate agent's headset crackled again, louder this time, sharp enough that even the nearest passengers heard it. She pressed it tighter against her ear. "Yes, I understand. No, he hasn't moved." A pause. Her eyes widened just slightly. "I'll tell them." She lowered her hand slowly and looked at Trevor. "They're holding departures at 2 other gates," she said. The words landed heavier than anything before. Trevor blinked. "What?" "Flights 814 and 902, she said. "They've been delayed. System override." Claire shook her head faintly. "That's not possible," she said. "Gate operations don't just—" She stopped, because something inside her had already begun to connect the pieces. Trevor turned back to Marcus, the man still sitting in seat 3A, the man who had made one call, the man who hadn't moved. "Mr. Reed," Trevor said, his voice lower now, stripped of the authority it once carried. "I need you to explain what's happening." Marcus looked up at him, calm, measured, present. "I think you're starting to see it," he said. "That's not enough," Trevor replied. "This is affecting other flights now." Marcus nodded slightly. "Yes," he said. Nothing more. No elaboration, no apology, just confirmation. The simplicity of it unsettled everyone in earshot. Behind Trevor, Richard's frustration snapped again. "This is insane," he said. "You're telling me one passenger is delaying multiple flights now? No one corrected him. No one agreed. Because no one understood it well enough to do either. Patricia leaned closer to her husband, her voice lower now, no longer confident, just strained. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered. Richard didn't respond. For the first time since this began, he didn't have an answer ready. Across the aisle, the man in the gray suit leaned forward slightly, his voice quiet but clear. "Something bigger is tied to him," he said. No one told him he was wrong, because no one could. The young man in row 4 kept his phone steady, capturing everything now. No hesitation, no attempt to hide it. The reflection of Marcus's stillness flickered across his screen, framed by the tension surrounding him. The cabin wasn't just watching anymore. It was learning. Claire finally stepped forward again, her voice softer than it had been since the beginning. "Mr. Reed," she said, "whatever this is, it's gone beyond us." Marcus nodded. "Yes." She swallowed. "Then help us understand it." For a moment, Marcus didn't respond. He looked at her. Really looked. At the uniform, at the tension in her posture, at the shift in her tone. Then he glanced past her, at the passengers, at the people who had watched, waited, said nothing. And now it's time. We're beginning to feel the weight of that silence. "It's not complicated," Marcus said finally. Trevor leaned in slightly. "Then say it," he replied. Marcus rested his hands on the armrests again. "The system you're using to manage flights," he said, "to coordinate departures, gate assignments, timing." He paused, just long enough. Then, "I built part of it." The words didn't land like an explosion. They landed like gravity, slow, unavoidable. Claire blinked. Trevor didn't move. Richard frowned, confusion overtaking irritation. "What does that even mean?" he asked. Marcus turned his head slightly toward him. "It means," he said, "that when something changes inside it, people notice." A silence followed. Not disbelief. Not denial, something else. Recognition. Trevor's mind moved quickly now, pieces aligning where they hadn't before. The call, the delays, the request for confirmation, the sudden involvement from corporate, the logo on the watch, the calm, always the calm. "You built the system?" Trevor repeated. Marcus shook his head slightly. "Not all of it," he said. "Just enough." That was somehow worse. Because it meant this wasn't accidental. This wasn't random. This wasn't a glitch. This was connected. Claire's hand tightened around her tablet. "Then why would it delay flights?" she asked. Marcus looked at her. "Because something flagged," he said. "What?" she pressed. He held her gaze. "An inconsistency." The word echoed. Different now. Sharper. Because it wasn't about seating anymore. It was about the system itself. Trevor felt it settle. And with it, a realization. This situation hadn't escalated because Marcus refused to move. It had escalated because the system had started asking questions. The same questions Marcus had asked. The same questions no one in this cabin had wanted to answer. Behind him, the gate agent spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're asking for full verification now," she said. "Identity, access level, everything." Trevor nodded slowly. "Give it to them," he said. Claire looked at him. Are we still proceeding with—" "No," Trevor said, cutting her off. The word was quiet, but final. "We're not proceeding with anything," he added. He turned back to Marcus. And for the first time since this began, he didn't look at him as someone to manage. He looked at him as someone to understand. "Mr. Reed," Trevor said, "I think we need to take a step back." Marcus nodded. "That would have helped earlier," he said. There was no accusation in his voice. That made it worse. Richard let out a slow breath, running a hand through his hair. "This can't be real," he said. "There's no way one person—" Marcus didn't interrupt him. He didn't need to, because the proof was already unfolding around them. Flights delayed, systems responding, voices on headsets that hadn't been there before, authority shifting. Not inside the cabin, but outside it. And for the first time since he stepped into this aisle, Richard Langford looked at Marcus Reed and didn't see someone out of place. He saw someone he didn't understand. The difference mattered. Claire felt it too. The space between assumption and realization. The moment where something breaks and something else begins. And Marcus, still seated, still calm, still exactly where he had been from the beginning, watched it all unfold. Not with satisfaction, not with anger, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had known all along that this was never just about a seat. And now, neither was anything else. The word inconsistency lingered in the air long after Marcus said it. It didn't belong to the cabin. It belonged to systems, to reports, to things that were supposed to run clean, invisible, unquestioned. And yet, here it was, sitting in seat 3A. Trevor felt it settle in his chest like something heavy and irreversible. "You said you built part of it," he said slowly, choosing each word now. "The system." Marcus nodded. "Yes." Claire's fingers tightened around her tablet. "Built? How?" she asked. Marcus looked at her. Not dismissive, not guarded. Just direct. "My company develops the coordination layer your airline uses," he said. "Flight sequencing, gate timing, passenger flow analytics." The words didn't sound dramatic. They sounded technical. But the effect was immediate. Claire's face changed. Not all at once, but enough. Trevor's posture shifted. The rigid authority he had carried since the beginning giving way to something else. Understanding, or the beginning of it. Richard Langford let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "That's ridiculous," he said. "You're telling me this guy controls airline systems now?" Marcus turned toward him. "I didn't say control," he replied. Richard smirked. "Good, because that would be insane." Marcus held his gaze. "I said develops," he said. "There's a difference." Richard opened his mouth, then stopped, because for the first time, he wasn't sure what to say next. Behind Trevor, the gate agent pressed her headset again. "Yes, I'm confirming now. Name is Marcus Reed. Seat 3A." A pause. Then her eyes widened. "Understood." She lowered her hand slowly. Trevor turned toward her. "What?" he asked. She didn't answer him right away. She looked at Marcus first, then back at Trevor. "They verified," she said quietly. Trevor felt the words before he understood them. "Verified what?" Claire asked. The gate agent hesitated. Then, "His company," she said. "Nexagrid Systems." The name hit the air like something solid. Trevor blinked. He knew that name. Not personally. Not directly. But he had seen it before. In briefings. In internal updates. In those emails marked priority that most people skimmed but didn't fully understand. Nexagrid. The platform they had been integrating for the past year. The system that was supposed to fix their delays. Their inefficiencies. Their growing list of customer complaints. Claire's lips parted slightly. "No," she whispered. Trevor turned slowly back to Marcus. "You're saying," he began, then stopped, because he didn't know how to finish the sentence. Marcus helped him. "I'm saying," he said calmly, "that your airline relies on our system to coordinate departures across multiple hubs." Silence. Not the kind they had before. This was different. This was understanding catching up to reality. Richard shook his head again, but there was no certainty left in it. "That doesn't make any sense," he said. "Why would something like that affect this flight?" Marcus looked at him. "It doesn't," he said. A pause. Then, "But decisions do." The words landed clean, precise, unavoidable. Claire felt something cold move through her chest. "So the delays," she said slowly. "The other flights—" Marcus didn't interrupt her. "They're responding," he said. "To what?" Trevor asked. Marcus held his gaze. "To a flagged event," he replied. Trevor swallowed. "What kind of event?" Marcus leaned back in his seat. "An anomaly in passenger handling," he said. "Something the system isn't designed to ignore." The cabin went still. Every word mattered now. Every sentence carried weight. The young man in row 4 lowered his phone just slightly, his expression shifting from curiosity to something closer to awe. The woman in row 2 pressed her lips together, her eyes glistening. She had known something was wrong. She just hadn't known how wrong. Claire took a small step back. "This can't be happening," she said under her breath. But it was. Trevor could feel it. The situation had flipped. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but completely. He looked at Marcus again, the man who hadn't raised his voice, the man who hadn't stood up, the man who had simply stayed. "You're the CEO," Trevor said. It wasn't a question. Marcus nodded once. "Yes." The word didn't echo. It didn't need to. Claire's breath caught. Richard stared at him. Really stared this time, as if trying to reconcile the man in the seat with the reality forming around him. "That's," Richard began, then stopped. Because suddenly, everything he had said before felt different. Patricia looked down at her hands, her grip on the handbag loosening for the first time. The illusion had cracked, and there was no putting it back together. Trevor straightened, but not with authority, with awareness. "Mr. Reed," he said, his voice quieter now, more careful. "I think we need to reassess." "No," Marcus said gently. Trevor stopped. Marcus met his eyes. "You need to acknowledge what already happened," he said. The difference was clear. Reassessing meant moving forward. Acknowledging meant looking back and facing it. Claire swallowed. Her voice, when it came, was almost unrecognizable. We didn't know," she said. Marcus looked at her. "No," he said. "You didn't." A pause, then, "But you didn't need to." The words landed harder than anything else had, because they stripped away the excuse. It wasn't about who he was. It was about how they treated him before they knew. Trevor felt it settle in his chest. Heavy. Final. Behind him, the gate agent spoke again, her voice tight with urgency. "They're asking for a status update," she said. "Corporate wants to know what's happening on board." Trevor nodded slowly. "I'll tell them," he said, but he didn't move right away. He looked at Marcus, at the man in seat 3A, the man they had tried to move, the man the system had now centered. And for the first time, Trevor Mason understood something clearly. This wasn't about fixing a situation. It was about answering for it. Marcus leaned back in his seat, his gaze drifting toward the window again. The sky hadn't changed, still gray, still waiting. But inside the cabin, everything had. And the question wasn't whether Marcus Reed belonged there. The question was, what would happen now that everyone else understood why he did? For a moment, no one moved. Not Trevor, not Claire, not the Langfords, not even the passengers who had been watching from the edges of the moment since it began. The cabin held still in a different way now. Not tense, not uncertain, exposed. Like a room where the lights had just been turned on after everyone had already taken their positions. Marcus remained in seat 3A, his gaze drifting calmly toward the window, as if the sky outside mattered more than the shift unfolding inside. But everyone else was looking at him. Not the way they had before. Not measuring. Not dismissing. Watching. Trying to understand how something so simple, a man sitting quietly in a seat, had turned into something they could no longer ignore. Claire Whitman felt it most. The shift didn't happen in her posture. It happened in her chest. A tightening, a recognition she hadn't allowed herself before. She looked at Marcus again, but this time, she didn't see a passenger. She saw a moment she couldn't take back. Her voice, when it came, was softer than it had been at any point since the beginning. "Mr. Reed," she said. He turned his head slightly toward her. "Yes?" She hesitated. That alone was enough to change everything. She began, then stopped. There were too many things she could say, too many versions of apology, too many ways to soften what had already happened. None of them felt right. Marcus waited, not impatiently, just present. Claire swallowed. "I misjudged the situation," she said finally. The words sounded rehearsed, safe, careful. Marcus held her gaze. "Yes," he said. Nothing more. No reassurance. No acceptance. Just acknowledgement. Claire felt it land. He wasn't arguing. He wasn't angry. That made it harder. Because anger would have given her something to respond to, something to manage. This was something else. Behind her, Trevor shifted slightly, his hands now resting at his sides instead of folded in front of him. He wasn't in control anymore. He knew it. And for the first time in his career, he wasn't sure how to regain it. "Mr. Reed," Trevor said, his voice quieter now, stripped of command. "We're going to need to file a full report on this." Marcus nodded once. "That's appropriate," he said. Trevor hesitated. "And we'll need your cooperation with that process." Marcus looked at him. "You have it," he said. A pause, then, "But not your version of it." Trevor blinked. "What do you mean?" Marcus leaned forward slightly, resting his hands together. "I mean," he said, "that what happened here doesn't get rewritten after the fact." The words settled, clear, firm, not aggressive, but immovable. Claire felt her throat tighten. The passengers heard it too. The man in row 4 lowered his phone just enough to speak, his voice quiet but steady. "I got everything," he said. No one told him to stop. No one told him to put the phone down. Because now, the recording wasn't a problem. It was evidence. The woman in row 2 finally spoke again, her voice trembling slightly. "He showed his ticket," she said, "right at the beginning." Her words weren't loud, but they carried. A man behind her nodded. "I saw it too," he added. There wasn't any confusion. The silence shifted again. Not passive, not complicit. Active. People were speaking now. Late, but speaking. Claire closed her eyes briefly. She could feel it slipping. Not the situation. The narrative. The version of events she had told herself was happening. Trevor looked around the cabin, at the passengers, at the phones, at the small, quiet movement of truth taking shape. This wasn't something he could contain anymore. This wasn't something he could smooth over. This was something that would leave the plane. Travel, spread, be seen, and judged. Richard Langford shifted in his seat across the aisle, his confidence gone, replaced by something tighter, more defensive. "This is being blown out of proportion," he said, though his voice no longer carried the same certainty. "We just asked for our usual seat." Marcus turned his head toward him. "And they tried to take it from me," he said. Richard opened his mouth, then stopped, because there was nothing to argue. Not anymore. Patricia stared down at her hands, her posture smaller now, as if the space around her had grown too large. The cabin had changed, not just in tone, in alignment. People weren't neutral anymore. They were seeing. And once you saw, you couldn't unsee. Claire took a step back, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think," she said, then stopped. Marcus looked at her. "That's the problem," he said gently. The words weren't cruel, they weren't sharp, but they were exact. Trevor exhaled slowly, running a hand over his mouth. "We need to correct this," he said. Marcus nodded. "Yes," he said. Another pause, then, "How?" Trevor asked. The question hung there, not rhetorical, not defensive, real. Marcus leaned back again, his posture returning to that same calm stillness that had unsettled the cabin from the beginning. "You start by telling the truth," he said. "Simple, direct, unavoidable." Trevor nodded slowly. Claire looked down at her tablet, then back up. "I'll write the report," she said. Marcus met her eyes. "Make sure it's accurate," he said. She nodded. "I will." For the first time, she meant it. The cabin settled into a new kind of quiet. Not heavy, not tense, reflective. Passengers shifted in their seats, some looking away, others still watching Marcus with a kind of quiet respect. The man in row 4 finally lowered his phone completely. Not because the moment was over, but because it had already been captured. The woman in row 2 wiped at her eyes, not from sadness, from recognition, from something that felt familiar, even if she couldn't name it. Marcus turned his gaze back toward the window. The sky outside hadn't changed, but something inside the cabin had, something subtle, something permanent. And as the weight of what had happened settled over everyone, one truth became impossible to ignore. The most uncomfortable part of this moment wasn't the conflict. It wasn't the delay. It wasn't even the revelation of who Marcus Reed really was. It was the silence that came before all of it. The silence that allowed it to happen. The silence that almost let it continue. And now, that silence had a cost. It settled over the cabin like something visible. Not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. People shifted in their seats, not because they were uncomfortable physically, but because something inside them had moved, and they didn't quite know where to put it. The woman in row 2 stared down at her hands, her fingers trembling slightly, as if they were remembering something she hadn't said earlier. The man in the gray suit leaned back, exhaling slowly, no longer pretending to be uninvolved. Even the young man who had been recording now held his phone loosely in his lap, his eyes fixed on Marcus, not as a subject, but as a witness. And at the center of it all, Marcus Reed remained still, unchanged, unmoved. That was what made everything else feel so different. Trevor Mason stepped forward again, but not with the same certainty he had carried before. This time his posture was careful, measured. "Mr. Reed," he said, his voice low, respectful in a way it hadn't been before. "We need to move forward in a way that addresses what happened here." Marcus turned his head slightly. "Yes," he said. No tension, no resistance, just agreement. Trevor nodded once, relieved, but only slightly. "What would you like to see happen?" he asked. The question hung in the air, not as a formality, as a shift. Claire looked up at Marcus. So did the Langfords. So did every passenger within earshot. Because this was the moment where power usually revealed itself, where anger demanded something, where humiliation turned into retaliation, where someone finally said, "Now it's my turn." Marcus didn't rush to answer. He looked at Trevor, at Claire, at the passengers, at the space that had once been filled with silence. Then he spoke. "I want the record to reflect exactly what happened," he said. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Trevor nodded. "That's already in motion," he replied. Marcus held his gaze. "Not just the outcome," he added. "The process." Trevor swallowed. He understood. The hesitation, the assumptions, the pressure, the attempt to move him without cause, all of it. "It will," Trevor said. Marcus nodded once. "Good." A pause. Then Trevor asked the question he hadn't expected to ask when this started. "And beyond that?" Marcus leaned back slightly. "There needs to be an independent review," he said. Claire's head lifted. "Independent?" she repeated. "Yes," Marcus said. "Not handled internally, not summarized, reviewed." Trevor felt the weight of that immediately. "That would go beyond our department," he said. "It should," Marcus replied. Silence. But not the same silence as before. This one wasn't avoidance. It was acknowledgement. Claire stepped forward, her voice quieter now, stripped of everything but honesty. "I didn't think," she said, then stopped again. Marcus looked at her. "No," he said gently. "You didn't." She nodded, her eyes lowering. "I understand that now." Marcus studied her for a moment. Then he said something no one expected. "This isn't about you," he said. Claire looked up, surprised. "It isn't?" she asked. Marcus shook his head slightly. "It's about what happens when people stop asking questions," he said. The words settled, deep, because they didn't accuse. They revealed. Trevor exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. "We'll make sure this is reviewed properly," he said, "at the highest level." Marcus nodded. "That's all I'm asking." Across the aisle, Richard Langford shifted uncomfortably, his voice quieter now, stripped of the certainty it had carried before. "So that's it?" he asked. "You're just letting this go with—" Marcus turned his head toward him. "Letting what go?" he asked. Richard hesitated. "This whole situation," he said. "The delays, the everything." Marcus studied him, then, "I'm not letting anything go," he said. A pause. "I'm making sure it doesn't happen again." The difference was clear. Richard looked down, his jaw tightening. He had expected something else. Anger, demand, punishment, something he could understand. This was harder, because it wasn't about him anymore. Patricia sat quietly beside him, her posture smaller now, her eyes fixed on the floor. The space around them had changed. They could feel it. The way people looked at them now, not with admiration, not with deference, with awareness, the kind that doesn't go away. Trevor turned back to Marcus. "There's one more thing," he said. Marcus nodded. "Go ahead." Trevor hesitated, then continued. "Corporate is asking if you'd be willing to speak with them directly." Marcus considered that for a moment. Then, "Yes," he said. Claire blinked. "You will?" she asked. Marcus looked at her. "Why wouldn't I?" She didn't answer. Because she understood. This wasn't about avoiding the system. It was about fixing it. The gate agent stepped forward again, her headset still pressed close. "They're ready," she said. Trevor nodded. "I'll connect it." He turned, moving toward the front, then paused. He looked back at Marcus. "Mr. Reed," he said. Marcus met his gaze. "Yes?" Trevor took a breath. "I'm sorry," he said. The words were simple, unpolished, not part of a script. Marcus nodded once. "I know," he said. That was enough. Claire stepped back, her shoulders lowering for the first time since this began. The passengers shifted again, but this time, it wasn't discomfort. It was release. Something had been addressed, not erased, not undone, but faced. Marcus leaned back in his seat, his gaze returning to the window. Outside, the sky had begun to lighten slightly, a thin break in the gray revealing something brighter beyond. Inside the cabin, the air felt different, not perfect, not clean, but honest. And for the first time since this began, the power in the room didn't belong to authority, it belonged to truth. And truth, once it arrived, didn't rush. It settled, slowly, completely. Marcus Reed remained in seat 3A as the cabin began to move again, not physically at first, but emotionally, like a room remembering how to breathe after holding it too long. Trevor's voice came faintly from the front as he connected the call. Claire stood just inside the galley, her hands no longer gripping the tablet, but resting loosely at her sides, as if the weight she had been carrying had shifted somewhere she couldn't quite reach. The Langfords sat in silence now, not the silence of control, the silence of realization. Richard stared forward, his shoulders stiff, his earlier confidence gone, replaced by something quieter, something that didn't know where to look. Patricia no longer held her handbag tightly. It rested in her lap, untouched. For the first time since boarding, they weren't the center of the room. They were part of it. And that difference mattered. From the front, Trevor's voice returned. "Mr. Reed, they're ready for you." Marcus stood. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just stood. The simple act drew every eye again, but not with tension this time. With attention, with respect, he stepped into the aisle, smoothing his jacket slightly, his movements calm, measured, unhurried. He didn't look at the Langfords. He didn't need to. As he passed them, Richard shifted in his seat, his mouth opening slightly, as if he wanted to say something, but nothing came. Marcus continued forward. The cabin parted without being asked. The same space that had once resisted him now made room. At the front, Trevor handed him the receiver. "Go ahead," he said quietly. Marcus took it. "Marcus Reed," he said. There was a pause. Then a voice, older, controlled, but unmistakably strained. "Mr. Reed, this is Daniel Keller, Executive Operations." Marcus listened. "We've reviewed the situation," the voice continued. "We want to offer a formal apology and assure you that corrective action is already underway." Marcus's expression didn't change. I'm listening, he said. Another pause. We're initiating an independent review, effective immediately. All personnel involved will be evaluated, and we will implement additional safeguards to prevent this kind of incident. Marcus nodded slightly. Good, he said. Then, after a moment, and the passengers who spoke up? The voice hesitated. They will not face any repercussions, Keller said quickly. We've already issued that directive. Marcus's gaze shifted briefly toward the cabin. The woman in row 2 looked up, startled, as if she hadn't expected to be included in the outcome. Thank you, Marcus said. Another pause. Mr. Reed, Keller added, we value our relationship with Nexagrid Systems. We hope this incident doesn't affect... Marcus cut in, not sharply, but clearly. This isn't about a contract, he said. Silence on the other end. It's about trust, Marcus continued, and whether your system reflects the people who use it. The words carried, even through the line. I understand, Keller said finally. Marcus held the receiver for a moment longer. Then prove it, he said. He handed the phone back to Trevor. No raised voice, no demand, just a standard. Trevor nodded once. I will, he said. Marcus stepped back into the cabin. The shift was complete now, not because of who he was, but because of what had been seen and understood. Claire approached him slowly. Mr. Reed, she said. He turned. I've submitted my statement, she added, exactly as it happened. Marcus nodded. That matters, he said. She swallowed. I didn't see it, she admitted quietly. Not until it was too late. Marcus studied her. Then, you saw it when it counted, he said. Her eyes filled slightly, though she quickly blinked it away. Thank you, she whispered. Marcus returned to his seat. 3A, the same seat. The one that had never changed. Only everything around it had. The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady, professional. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are now preparing for departure. A soft ripple moved through the cabin. Seatbelts clicked. Overhead bins closed. The ordinary motions of flight resumed, but nothing about the moment felt ordinary anymore. As the plane began to push back from the gate, Marcus looked out the window. The gray sky had broken slightly, a thin line of light stretching across the horizon. He rested his hand on the armrest. The same place it had been when this began. The same place he had chosen not to move from. Across the aisle, the woman in row 2 leaned slightly toward him. Mr. Reed, she said softly. He turned. I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. Marcus held her gaze. You said it when it mattered, he replied. She nodded, her eyes warm with something deeper than apology. Gratitude. Across the cabin, people sat differently now, not just relaxed, aware. The young man in row 4 no longer held his phone up. He didn't need to. The moment had already been captured, not just on video, but in memory, in understanding, in the quiet shift that would follow them long after this flight ended. The engines roared to life, louder now, stronger. The plane began to move. Forward. Finally. Marcus leaned back, closing his eyes for just a second, not from exhaustion, from release. Then he opened them again. Outside, the runway stretched ahead, clear, unobstructed. And inside the cabin, something had changed that couldn't be undone, not by silence, not by habit, not by appearance, because the truth had already taken its place, and it wasn't moving. Somewhere in Detroit, Mrs. Carter would find an envelope tucked beneath her paperwork. No name, no explanation, just enough to keep the kitchen open. The boy would come back next week. And Marcus? Marcus would be there. Not because anyone asked, but because that was who he was. A man who stayed, who didn't move, who didn't need to prove anything, for the truth to stand beside him. And long after the flight touched down, after the reports were filed, after the reviews were completed, after the systems were updated, one thing would remain. The seat hadn't changed, but the way people saw it had. And maybe, just maybe, that was where real change began. When Marcus Reed stayed seated in 3A and simply said, "I'm not moving," he didn't just hold on to a seat. He held on to something far more important, his dignity, in a moment when the entire room was ready to take it from him. This story isn't about power showing up at the end. It's about the cost of judging someone before you even know who they are, and how quickly that judgment can unravel when the truth finally steps into the light. Next time you find yourself in a situation where something feels off, where someone is being treated unfairly, don't wait for proof of who they are before you decide how to treat them. Do what Marcus didn't get at first. Recognize their humanity in real time. If this story moved you, comment 1 below. And tell me, have you ever witnessed a moment where someone was judged too quickly and you stayed silent? I want to hear your story. And stay with me, because the next story might change the way you see power even more.